Welcome, everyone, to Scientists to Go. My name is Zoe. I work here at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. And today I am very excited that we are joined by Dr. Adrienne Kovach. And she is a professor at the University of New Hampshire, where she studies some of the wildlife that we find here in New England and how we can better conserve it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Adrienne in just a minute. I actually want to let us know that we're going to hear from her for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then you all will have time to ask questions. So if you think of any questions, feel free to put them into the chat, or you can save them for the end, and then I'll read them out to Adrienne at the end of her presentation. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Adrienne.
Great.
Oh, and I will stop sharing my screen.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here to tell you just a little bit about what I do. Um, so yeah. So the field, what I do is I study animals, and I study animals for the purpose of conserving them. And so we call that wildlife conservation. And I'm going to start off by telling you just a little bit about myself, just introducing myself, where I'm from. So, my parents actually are immigrants from Hungary, and they came over before I was born. And this picture here, this old black and white picture, shows my parents arriving when they first immigrated with my older brother in their lap. They looked a little shell-shocked, but it all got better after that. And then I grew up in Kansas, and I attended the University of Kansas for my undergraduate, and so I'm a real Jayhawk. And then I moved to North Carolina. I went to North Carolina State University for my graduate school, and then I moved up to New England. And eventually I got a job here at UNH at the University of New Hampshire, and I've been here for more than 20 years. So, how I got to where I am today, when I was young, I was super interested in anatomy. I loved everything about muscles and bones and dissection. It was the coolest thing. And I thought that maybe I wanted to be a doctor until I was in college. And then I got introduced to ecology and animals and wildlife. And I'd never learned anything about that before. I had no idea that that was like a job that you could do, that you could just work with animals. And I absolutely loved it because you could be outside and you could be studying nature, and it was just so much fun. And then so my first experience was with little rodents that were in the prairie in Kansas. We trapped them and we looked at their ecology. And then later in graduate school, I got to do something that I really, really wanted to do, which is I got to work with black bears. And that was just a really, really fun time for me. It was a great experience. I studied the mating behavior of black bears in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. And yeah, but today, what I do is I still rarely get to work with big charismatic wildlife like bears, but most of the time I spend working on species that really need our help, species that of wildlife that are in conservation concern. Um, and so here, this slide shows a number of different animals that I work with. I work with a lot of beautiful birds. I even work with a butterfly that's up only found in the Presidential Range of the White Mountains. I have some projects on fish like striped bass and Atlantic cod. And then I'm going to be talking to you about how I spend most of my time on two projects about on birds and bunnies. I also want to let you know that in my work, I use all kinds of different tools. I'm not doing the same thing every day. I do a lot of lab work. I get to go outside in the field. I get to collect ecological data, but I also collect samples, and we use the samples, and I'll tell you about for DNA. So I'll tell you about that in a little bit. And I also work with lots of people. I have lots of collaborations and partnerships. I work with different biologists in different states. I work with biologists in different universities, and all of that is just really important for me and for transferring the information to different groups of people. And when I'm not doing science, I like to do a lot of fun things outside. I have two dogs, they're a lot of fun. And then I have a huge garden with my husband, and we grow poultry. And yeah, I hike and run and swim and do things like that. And importantly, I'm still learning. I volunteer at a bird banding station in the spring and the fall, and there's so many amazing, beautiful birds that come through, and we're always learning new things about them. All right, so today, I'm going to tell you about I'm going to do two case studies. One on like I said, on a bunny, and one on a very special bird. So, um, first case study I'm going to tell you about is about the New England Cottontail, which is actually the only rabbit that's native to New England and the Northeast. And we're going to talk about how we're trying to restore that rabbit. So here's a New England Cottontail. It just looks like any old cute bunny. It has some really detailed features that are really hard to see, but an expert can find these features. They have this little black line along the side of their ears. They have a black spot on their between the ears as well. Their eyes are relatively small for a cottontail, and then they're chomping away on lots of leaves and shoots and stems. In the wintertime, they chew the just the bark and the wood and sticks off of, bushes that are there in the wintertime because there's no green things in the winter. So the New England cottontail, it is a cottontail. And it, like I said, the only native cottontail in this area. So it's a really important bunny for us New Englanders. However, there are other rabbits in the area. So there is one rabbit that it's easily confused with, and that's the Eastern cottontail. The Eastern cottontail is a little bit bigger and it's non-native. It was brought into this area from the Midwest and the South in the early 1900s. And so in this picture with the fellow holding two rabbits, the one on the left, which is smaller, is the New England cottontail, and the other one is the Eastern cottontail. And then over on the right side of the screen is a snowshoe hare, which is a much bigger rabbit, has bigger ears, bigger feet. You can tell with the tracks on the top how much bigger the feet are. And it turns white in the wintertime. The cottontails don't turn white. So this thick, nasty, dense habitat that nobody would want to go through, a bunch of briars and bushes and sticky, scratchy things, that's where New England cottontails like to live. That's their habitat. We officially we call this shrub habitat, a shrubland, or sometimes we call it a young forest, because eventually, if you leave those bushes alone, they'll grow up into trees and into a forest. And this is a very rare habitat. And so that's why we're interested in it. And that's why it's important to think about it and conserve it for the New England cottontail. So turns out not just the New England cottontail, but a lot of different animals. So 65 different species of birds and mammals and reptiles also use this habitat, and those are also of conservation concern because this is such a rare and declining habitat. So we're really interested, it's really important to keep this type of a habitat on our landscape to support all these different animals. So today's landscape doesn't have a lot of that kind of habitat on it, right? Today in New England, we have a lot of forest, and forest is a great habitat for some species, but not all animals live in forest. So like the ones I just told you about, including the New England cottontail, they don't live in mature forest. They live in bushes. And then a lot of our habitat is also developed, like the picture on the right, which is also not good for the New England cottontail. So, because New England cottontail, we know it's in trouble, and we know that it has this really rare habitat that it needs. There's been this whole effort to conserve this species since 2011. Okay, so for about 15 years now, a lot of people have been working together, doing what they can to conserve this species. And so, some of what they do includes making habitat. So here are some examples of folks doing different ways of creating habitat. A lot of how you create habitat for this kind of shrubby habitat is you have to cut down trees to make it. And then you let those things grow back and they become bushy, and then they become that nice, thick habitat that bunnies like. Also, to help this rabbit, we're doing captive breeding. So there's some zoos that are on board that are we take some cottontails out of the wild, we put them into the zoos, we let them reproduce, and then we take some of those baby bunnies when they're young, a little bit older, and we release them into wild populations. And so that's what the picture in the middle shows. There's a young rabbit with a radio collar on, and it's going to be released into the wild, and then it's going to be tracked to see how it does. And so we do also have like an island breeding colony, and we have these outdoor pens, like you can see on the left. And those pens are also places where we can breed these New England cottontails more safely because they're protected with fences. And so here's a picture of a couple cottontails being reintroduced into a wild population. So once they've made it out of the zoo, they get placed into a habitat. Okay, so all that stuff's going on to help the bunny. And here's where sort of my work comes in. So what I'm helping folks to understand is any of this management, all this stuff we're doing, is it helping? Is it working? And how? And then I'm going to also tell you how can we know if it is or isn't. So what we do is to answer that question is we do a lot of monitoring or surveying, we call it, where we look for rabbits. We're surveying. So we go into a habitat and look, and the picture on the left shows how we follow this really intensive paths to search as much as we can to find the cottontails. But in reality, we're not even looking for the bunnies, we're looking for their poop. Okay. And then we collect it, we put it in a vial, and we bring it back to the lab. So you're probably thinking, why are we looking for bunny poop? Okay. Why poop? And the answer to that is because it contains DNA. So here's where I've got a question for you. And the question is, what's DNA? How could that be useful? Anyone want to type anything in? I'm not sure I can see a chat box, but if I will pause to see if you guys can think of some answers. What's DNA and why on earth would we be thinking about that? It's a hard question, I know.
It's tricky. If anyone has an answer or a guess, feel free to put it into the chat.
If not, I can just talk about it.
Oh, we want to see what DNA is in rabbits,
Yeah.
or we could know which species.
Yeah,
Um,
excellent. These are great. These are great. So, yes, DNA is in all of our cells and all of our bodies, and it's sort of what they call the blueprint for life. It codes how everything works in our bodies. And importantly, here, everyone's DNA is unique. It's like a fingerprint, okay? Totally unique. So, for that reason, okay, we can get DNA from tissue samples. Like, so for humans, we sometimes give a blood sample, we get a swab of getting from our saliva, we can get DNA from that, we can get DNA from a hair sample. This tube shows DNA that's been extracted. The white stringy stuff is the DNA that was extracted from some tissues. For animals, for wildlife, we can't really ask them to give us a swab. I mean, sometimes we can catch them and force them to give us a swab, but something much nicer that we can do is leave them alone and look for tissues that they leave behind in the environment. And so that could be really creative things like poop in the case of our bunnies, feathers, hairs. We could even put up little barbed wire to try to snag their hairs. We can even get DNA from eggshells and sometimes from tracks. So lots of ways that we can get DNA without bothering the animal themselves. And that's what we're doing with the bunny. So once we get the DNA, once we get the bunny poop and we can get DNA from it, what can it tell us? So the answer here is that DNA is like a barcode. It's you're getting this unique identifier for every rabbit. And so just like a couple of you said, we can figure out what species is it. Do we really have that rare New England cottontail, or do we have the Eastern cottontail? Or maybe the snowshoe hare. And then we can get more specific and we can say, which rabbit is that? Who is it? Is it a male? Is it a female? How many rabbits did we find? So we can tell how many unique rabbits there are, and we can figure out relationships. We can put together pedigrees and figure out who's related to whom, who reproduced with whom. It's almost like a soap opera that we can put together just from the poop, just from figuring out the DNA. Okay. And so really the bunny poop is revealing to us who's there, how many, and where they are in the habitats where we're looking. All right. So keeping all that in mind, question is, what have we learned from all this stuff that we've been doing? And so here's an example to give you an example of the type of things we've learned. So we have been using DNA, and like I've explained, these surveys of bunny poop to track what's happened to New England cottontails that have been newly introduced. So here's a population that was newly reintroduced to an area in New Hampshire called the Bellamy River Wildlife Management Area. It's actually just down the road from UNH. And so in this figure, some rabbits, the orange dots show you where rabbits were placed in that within that yellow outlined area in 2013 and 2014. So, a dozen years ago. And then the arrow to the lower orange area, orange dots shows that after a couple of years, there were more rabbits there and they dispersed. They moved to a new area because there were so many, they were doing well. Well, if we look at the next figure, it actually shows not so good news. Only 1 year later, there were many fewer rabbits. There were only four, and they were all males. But knowing that was really helpful because it let us know that we had to add more rabbits to that habitat. So we did. We put out more rabbits. And then it really paid off because by 2020, there were more than 30 rabbits in that area. All these different colors show you a uniquely different rabbit, and the circles are females and the squares are males. So all kinds of rabbits, this population expanded, they moved into new areas. And so from that, we learned that this can work. Reintroduced cottontails can breed successfully in the wild, and the population grew and expanded. So we did learn a lot just from looking at the poop and figuring this all out. Okay, so that was sort of a quick whirlwind of what we've learned from bunnies. And now I'm going to move on to a second case study on birds. And these are a really special type of birds that nest in marshes, and specifically tidal marshes. So this leads us to our second question. What is a tidal salt marsh, or what is a salt marsh, period? Anyone have any ideas on what is a salt marsh? If you do, type it in the chat and I'll hear about it. I'll give you a few seconds to think on it. What's a salt marsh?
All right, someone said a river with salt.
Yeah, there's usually rivers involved and there's usually salt involved. That's great. Anyone else have anything to expand on that?
Someone suggested that maybe we could find bunnies there.
Oh, maybe. They don't love the salt. We'll see that the birds like it better.
Yeah, a place where, so we're thinking that maybe it'd be a difficult place for some animals to live,
Awesome. It is a difficult place to live. Yes.
and lots of comments about salt. It's definitely an
Salt.
important part.
Yes. Absolutely. We're on the right track. So this is
And
an
muddy too.
Muddy, right. It's super muddy and sometimes stinky. Yes, absolutely. And very sunny because there's no trees in a salt marsh. Right. So a salt marsh is really a place, we're looking at it from above here. It's an aerial view, so top down. And it's the place where the ocean meets the land. And so, yes, the water is flowing in through these channels. You can see rivers, you can see creeks, you can see channels, and the water is flowing in and it's flowing out with the tidal cycle. And so it's like this transition between ocean and land. And you may have heard the word estuary. Estuaries are surrounding tidal marshes, or marshes are within estuaries, you could say. And marshes are really harsh environments. That is very true. Has anyone who's been to a salt marsh? They look like this when you're there, kind of on the ground. This is a close up. Anyone been to a salt marsh? Anyone putting yes in the chat box?
Yeah, we've got some people that have been. I know I've been.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. All right. So a few people have.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right. Yes, they're very wet. All right. Awesome. Okay. So, um, marshes have a lot of benefits, including for people. But one thing they do, this slide lists a bunch of things that they do for us. They filter the water, so they're improving the water quality because that water is always moving in and out, in and out. They provide this great habitat for fish, for shellfish. So they're almost like little nursery areas. Lots of really young baby fish can be found in the estuaries and in the marshes. And they're also habitat for a number of birds. A lot of wading birds, like this heron, are eating the fish that are in these marshes. They actually can hold on to carbon even better than trees and forests can. It's really an amazing thing. They're really valuable for holding on to carbon. And they protect the shoreline. That's probably what they're best known for. They protect against storms and protect our shorelines. All right. So salt marshes are affected by the tides. So on a daily and monthly basis, these tides are getting inundated on a daily basis. Twice daily, there's a high tide and a low tide. And then also the tides are influenced by by the moon. So there are high tides that are associated with either a peak of the moon phase, usually. Okay, so back to this. So it's a very harsh environment, and as it turns out, not very many animals can live in this kind of environment. Very few. There's a few, there's a few like a meadow vole, and there's a type of mouse that can live in a marsh. There's a type of turtle called a diamond terrapin. And there's a certain kind of snake that can live in them, but very few. Mostly some birds can. There's some birds that can really live in marshes, and they're really specialized to do so. So I'm going to talk about one of them, a salt marsh sparrow that's absolutely specialized to live in these salt marshes, and it only lives in marshes. You'll never find them anywhere else in the breeding season or the wintering season. They're always in salt marshes. And this figure shows the type of habitat that they like and the types of grasses that they use to build their nests. And they build their nests just on the surface of the marsh, so pretty much on the ground. And they take those grasses, they weave them into these really hard to find or secretive nests right above that water level. Okay, so they're looking for very specific features for their nests. Their nests are very hidden, really hard to find. This shows one. If you look really closely, you can see kind of the opening to it in the front here. And they're really kind of like the Goldilocks of birds in terms of looking for just the right place to put their nests. So the elevation is high enough so that they're avoiding being flooded by the tides, but not too high so they don't get eaten by predators, and just the right grasses that they use for this. So here I'm going to show you a little video, a short video of of this right in the middle. There's a camera that's placed right on this nest, and then so the view is a little funny. It looks like the nest is really conspicuous. It's actually not this conspicuous at all. It's just the view from the camera, and then you're going to see a bird come in to the nest. Okay, so here we go. Here she comes. That's the female. She's coming to her nest. She brought food. She's feeding some chicks that she has in there. So there she is feeding her chicks. And pay attention when she comes out. She's feeding them and now she's cleaning up the nest. And there she is. See a white thing in her mouth? That's a fecal sac. She just took their poop out of there to keep that nest very, very clean. So, really cute bird. You didn't even see her fly. She didn't fly. She scurried around like a little mouse almost. And that's really typical of these birds. They're really secretive and they hide under the grasses and they're really hard to see. Okay. The other cool thing about these birds is they have to nest in a way that they don't get flooded out by those tides. And the tides are synced with the moon. So the birds nesting is actually pretty well synced to the moon as well and synced to the tidal cycle. And so if they follow this pattern where they make their nest and lay their eggs pretty much right after the full moon peak high tide when it's the wettest on the marsh, then their eggs have time to, they can incubate their eggs, they have time to hatch, and then they feed their chicks, just like you saw in that video. And then, like 23 to 26 days after they started this whole business, their chicks are grown up and ready to go. We call that fledging, and they're ready to leave. And if they can get to that point right before the next high tide or the next full moon, then they're good to go. They've made it. And that's the strategy that they have to do. And so this is great. We know this, but the one thing that we're worried about is that the marshes are getting wetter, sea levels are rising, we have more storms. And so sometimes there's more flooding, and sometimes it's hard for these birds to find enough enough days where there's no floods on the marsh to make it through this pattern that I just showed you. So here's to convince you that this really could be a problem. Here's the same marsh in two situations, one at low tide and one at high tide. So really different at high tide, so much water. So if there's a bird nest there, a sparrow nest, and that water raises up really high, like in that bottom picture, that can be really a problem. And so here's an example of a nest that got flooded where an egg got washed out. So this didn't have the best timing, but some nests are more successful than this. So we're trying to understand all this. We're trying to collect data to figure out how these birds can make it successfully. And so the first thing we have to do is we have to monitor them and we have to collect data from these birds. So what we do is we go out on these marshes, we set up nets, we catch the birds. So here's some picture of us catching birds. We put bands on them. That's what's happening in the bottom with those pliers. This doesn't hurt at all. It's just like a little bracelet that we put on their toes, on their legs, right above their toes. And then, whoops. And then we also can monitor for their nests. This is really hard. We have to go out, we have to find these nests. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack, but then we find them and then we can monitor them. So this nest here has two of these nests on the bottom. We can see eggs in them. And so we'll keep coming back to that nest to check on those eggs. And here's an example of what that might look like. So in the first picture, there's a nest with eggs. Then we have each time we go back, things get better, right? Things are developing. So that first we see the eggs have hatched. We got really young chicks. Then when they're 7 days old, we can band them. And if you look closely, you can see on this chick in the front, in this middle picture, there's a silver aluminum band on its leg. So we've identified that bird. It'll wear that band for the rest of its life. Then at 10 days old, Now they're old enough to live, to get out of that nest. They can move, they can do everything. So we say at that stage they've fledged, and you can see a bird here in the hand that has now fledged, and it can even fly. So fast. They can grow up very fast. And so here's another picture of us collecting data from these birds. We take all kinds of measurements, we weigh them. We put here, you can see the bands that we put on their legs. We sometimes put color bands on them that help us identify them even more carefully. And then one last thing we're doing to try to learn about how these birds are faring is that we can put these little transmitters on their back. So if you look at the picture on the left, this bird has a little transmitter, a little tag on its back with an antenna hanging off. And from that, that has a little radio that's transmitting information. Then we can put these nodes out and a big receiving antenna on the marsh. And from that, we can figure out what these birds are doing, where they are, because every time they fly by one of these nodes, we pick up a signal from their transmitter. And so here's an example of one male bird, one male sparrow that was tracked. The blue dots show where all those nodes are, and the white dots show all the places where we picked up this bird, where it was detected. And then the white circle area on the right shows what we call its home range. We can say that's all the space that this bird used. So this can tell us a lot about what these birds are doing. And when we start restoring the marshes, we can understand how the birds are responding to all the things we're doing to try to help them. So yeah, that is the end of my story there. And to wrap it up, I just want to say that all these things that we're doing, we're trying to do so that we can contribute to sustain biodiversity. That's really the goal of all the things that we're doing. And yeah, I'll open it all up to questions.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them into the chat and I'll read them off to our presenter. And while we're waiting for any to come in, I'm curious, what's one thing that you're really excited about in your field of research right now?
What I'm excited about, I'm really excited about the last thing I talked about because that's really new to us. So it's really exciting to me to be able to use those tags to figure out what the birds are doing. And one of my side interests are that we can actually get some behavioral information from it. We can learn about mating behavior by tracking, putting tags on males and females. So that's one of my pet interests. But yeah, that tracking is really cool.
All right. Yeah. We have a few questions coming in. So one of the questions is, I think we might have touched on this. Do you track the bunnies too, like in a similar way to those birds that you're talking about?
Oh yeah, good question. I don't, but some people do. Sometimes we put radio telemetry. Yeah, sometimes they get collars on them. Um, Only a few bunnies do, and sometimes they do that when after they've released them into a new area. Just in the beginning, we want to see how they're doing, but we can't. It's really a lot of work and a lot of money to put collars on rabbits, so they can't do it to everybody. They can't do it for all the rabbits.
Another question is, do you like working with larger animals or smaller animals?
Oh, that's such a relevant question to me because when I started, I was sure my dream was to work initially my dream was to work with elephants, and I even wrote a letter when I was very young to the premier elephant biologist. And I worked at the Kansas City Zoo, and I volunteered and I shoveled elephant dung every time I went. That was the closest I got to elephants, and I loved it. But and then in graduate school, I got to work on bears, and that really was my dream to work on big animals. And I loved it, and I wouldn't exchange that experience for anything. But the funny thing is, once I started working with birds, and I didn't start working with birds till I was adult, I realized how amazing they are. And I love birds. But when I first started working with birds, I was scared because they're so delicate, and I thought I was going to hurt them. And I didn't, but it was harder for me to work with birds than with bears just because I was so worried about hurting them. So, fun question.
Um, I had a couple of questions about that, so that's great. Another question is there a black bunny that lives in Maine?
Oh, I don't know. I've seen black squirrels.
Mhm.
I've never seen a black bunny. Sounds like maybe somebody's heard of a black bunny, but
Yeah.
I
I
don't know.
know those snowshoe hares, they turn white in the summer. So
Yeah.
maybe sometimes they can look a little bit white and black because of the colors in their fur changing.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
Maybe
maybe we're
that's it.
thinking of that.
Yeah.
Um, how many, so if you're out looking for rabbits, how many bunnies would you find in a day is a question.
Oh, good question. So we rarely see the rabbits. You're lucky if you see one. And the but if we from our DNA, usually we figure out, usually something like 15 to 30 rabbits in a patch, depending on how big the area is. Sometimes fewer, but usually like that. Yeah.
Is there a favorite species that you work with? Like, is it those Saltmarsh sparrows that you were talking about, or is there
That's
a
hard.
favorite bee? I know it's a hard one.
That's really hard. Yeah, I mean, it used to be bears, I'll be honest. For a long time, it was bears, but it's kind of expanded. I now love them all. I love the birds so much now, so I can't give you a favorite. Sorry.
Um, okay, a lot of questions about the color of the bunnies, so I want to get to these ones.
Okay.
The New England cottontails that you study, are they usually just that one color? They're sort of that brownish
Yes, they're yeah,
colors.
they're very similar. Yeah,
Okay.
you can't really tell one from the next.
Okay. So then our question was about the rarest color would be for a bunny. And I think the bunnies that we have as pets, they can be lots of different colors. And I
Yeah.
think that's because they're a different species. Am I right?
Yeah, domestic rabbits are different. Right, right. Domestic
Yeah.
rabbits come in all kinds, yes, and they can be very, very pretty and interesting and fluffy and different, long hair and yeah, all kinds of patterns. But the New England cottontail, in fact, cottontails in general are all the same brown color that I showed you. Yeah, no
Okay.
variation.
All right. Good to know. Um, a question about those bands that you put on the sparrow's legs.
Hmm.
When you have the colored bands, what can that tell you? Like, how does that help?
Yeah. So there's in some studies we've color banded them in a unique way, and we put different color combinations on all the males. So each male had a different color combination. So it could be like blue, yellow, white, or red, green, green, or whatever, right? And so each male, we could identify them by their unique color combinations. And then for that same study, we put pink bands on all the females. So we knew that those were females. And we made behavioral observations. So we used binoculars and a spotting scope, and we were trying to track the mating behavior actually of the birds by having these having them banded with these unique colors. You could always tell who's whom. Yeah, basically.
Cool. Um, this one I had to look up because I wanted to make sure I was understanding it. It's a term that I wasn't familiar with. But can rabbits be piebald like deer? And for anyone that's listening, because I didn't know this, but piebald is when deer have like lots of different it's a genetic mutation where they can have different spots of different colors. Um,
Yeah.
and
So
stuff like that.
yeah, so it's coming back to the color question, and I've never seen that. So I've never seen anything like that in rabbits. So the closest thing you could get is what you were describing earlier, Zoe, where sometimes like a snowshoe hare might look really patchy and might have some white and some brown and maybe a little bit of black even when it's changing its coat. But not on the cottontails.
Mhm.
Not that I know of. Never seen it.
Yeah. Okay. Um, all right. This question, again, with those colored bands, a question about why not just put blue bands for male sparrows and pink bands for females.
Right. Good. Right. So this is because we wanted to tell the difference between different individuals. So we literally would track what any every different male, like what we had something like 50 different males because of the different colors we put on them. We recognized that there were like 50 different males and we were tracking what they were all doing. And from that we actually learned that some males have a much they have a much higher mating success than some other males. So they're different in their behaviors and they're different in who's the most successful breeder. So by giving them unique colors like that, that's how we were able to figure that out.
Very cool.
And with DNA, of course.
Um, Lucas asked, "What's the craziest animal that you've seen?"
Craziest.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
goodness. I don't know what makes a crazy animal. I mean, I went to Africa once. I was very lucky and I got to see some really exotic wildlife there. You know, I got to see zebras and giraffes and elephants and lions even. I even saw a leopard. And the some of the crazy ones were the ungulates, like things that are related to deers. They have some really interesting ones with very elaborate um, antlers and horns, and those were probably the craziest things I've seen.
Mhm. Cool. If anyone else has any more questions, we have a couple more minutes. Um, but I guess I'll ask one more.
Yeah.
Um, what is your favorite part of your job? Like, what gets you up in the morning that you're really excited
Hmm.
about?
That's a good question. Well, I'll tell you, I work with a lot of students, and especially my graduate students and undergraduates who do research with me. I think that's probably the thing I get most excited about. So it's really fun to talk to them about what they're doing and what they learned, and we figure things out together, and we go out in the field together and catch birds together and things like that. And so that's the most fun, I think, part of my job. And the second part is simply the flip side of that. What's good for the animals? Are we just the hope that what we're doing is going to have some help, is going to help them in some way?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely relate to that. I love working with the students and I love knowing that what we do is impactful, that it helps.
Yeah.
All right.
That's the
Well,
hope.
yeah. Um, well, with that, I think I'm going to close it out. Um,
Okay.
but thank you so much, Adrienne, for this presentation. I had
Yeah.
such a lovely time. And thank you, everyone, for joining. If you're interested in joining any more Scientists to Go presentations, I'll be sending information out about that, or you can check out our website. And with that, I think we'll say goodbye.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone. Bye.